Well, welcome to the Tuesday workshop, Thinker Community. My good friend and colleague, Paul Edwards, here from Emissary Publishing, making the magic happen.
We have been busy lately, have we not?
Been a lot. It's been good, though.
Yeah.
Well, I want to start off with this screen share. I'm gonna put something up here on the screen. This is the topic for the day. Topic for the day, I was reminded of this verse as it came up on my screen. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Now, I recognize it might be a little bit of a controversial topic, but this is a faith-based community, or a community for faith-based founders. So I don't want to be shy about this idea. And I don't think you have to necessarily have a Christian or Judeo-Christian experience or background to understand that maybe there's something more going on than the things that we see before us. And maybe we are indeed spirit, and our spirit works its way out into our bodies and then into our work, into our relationships, our friendships, our intimate relationships. And so I want to open up the floor here today with you, Paul, as we discuss this verse and how it works, or what your experience has been as a founder.
Yes, and to lighten the load a little bit for anybody who might be listening who is not necessarily what you would call a devout believer, we're not going to take an offering at the end of this. There's not going to be an altar call. We're not. Right. We're going to force them. We're going to get them in there, by golly. No, it's not like
Did I come in hot and heavy? Does that feel hot and heavy to everybody?
No, you didn't. I just like to put people at ease.
Like in the AC-130 gunship.
Yeah.
Just coming in.
Pay your money and we will absolve you of your sins.
I don't ever mean to be that person.
No, but there's an interesting, well, first of all, I think when people hear spiritual, including people who are believers, what they tend to think of is religious. And religious, in my mind, is simply the outward expression of what you inwardly believe about the spiritual world. And you either believe it exists or you don't. And if you don't, you nevertheless collide with it regularly. Because the spiritual world simply, the greatest definitions I've heard have come from Rabbi Lapin and Rabbi Daniel Lapin, and he says it simply means whatever cannot be measured in a laboratory. Or another way to appropriately recognize it is whatever animals would not recognize. But human beings would, because we're spirit beings. So, for example, if you and I sit down to eat a meal, Jeff, your dog, immediately recognizes what's going on, right? Oh, they're eating. Maybe I can get some too. And he comes up to the table and he tries to beg for scraps, right? He recognizes that we're eating. If you lay down for a nap, Jeff can look at you and say, oh, he's taking a snooze. Yeah, I do that too. But if you sit in your chair with a newspaper and sit motionless and read it for several minutes, Jeff has no clue what you're doing. No, he knows to go and he might know to go and get the newspaper from the driveway, but when he brings it to you, he doesn't know why you need it or what you're doing with it or what it means. And that's because writing and expression and literature and software coding and mechanical blueprints and all these things, those are spiritual things. They're spiritual because no other creature on the face of the earth can do them. So right from the get-go, I want people to understand that when we're talking about this is how I read this verse, right? When we're talking about spiritual warfare, spiritual things, I'm not imagining, some whoa type of thing in the sky with, streaks of different colors and explosions and all of that. It's much more accessible and much more right in front of our faces. This is the way I read it, of course. But traditionally, the way some church dogma has made it sound is that, yeah, it's magic spells and incantations and all that sort of stuff. It's a much more broader definition. Might not exclude people trying to cast spells and do all that sort of stuff, but certainly not limited to that. So don't think here that we're talking about church stuff necessarily, and don't think here that we're talking about only the occult. That's simply one subcategory among many. And so to bring it back to what we're talking about with business owners, I would say one of the clearest examples of this that I have seen, is certainly for myself and for a lot of business owners, has been the inner critic. The inner critic is undoubtedly a spiritual essence. In fact, you may well consider that in the broader category of satanic, not cult satanic, not diabolical satanic, but simply adversarial is what that name means, right? The adversary. It's an adversarial presence. And the only way that I've found to defeat that guy inside me is to treat him as a spiritual being with an intellect and will and emotions and ability to understand language, because when I confront him in certain ways, using certain words and certain tone of voice and certain context and circumstance, and I treat him as a real being, he goes away. Like, he literally has no answer for what I say. So, all of that to say, this is a fine example this is a great verse to help a believing or even a non-believing entrepreneur realize that what blocks you from what you're trying to achieve, what stymies you, what cripples you from the inside, what hamstrings you in many instances, is invisible. But it's not inaccessible. It's not something that you can't, it's not something you can't perceive or speak to or respond to or retaliate against. And yeah, I think it's very helpful and a very good reminder. And now, with having said that, we're going to put a URL on the screen where you can donate to our cause.
Oh my gosh.
I'm kidding. We're not going to do that.
Mr. Edwards. Well, let me take an opportunity to respond to some of that. I might disagree with Rabbi Daniel Lapin on the idea that animals are not spiritual or are not spiritual beings. And here's why I would say that. I believe that animals, while they can't understand I think animals are actually more spiritual than we are, or see more clearly the spiritual elements than we do.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, some of the spiritual elements I would expose are things like our feelings. Where do they come from? What do they mean? What is love? How do we experience love? How do we experience hate? There's not necessarily, there is a biological response to the feelings, but where are they? And if I do, I'll use Jeff as an example because he's great, right? And I wrote about him in my first book, What Could Be. Where am I at?
Which is available anywhere fine books are sold. Anywhere.
And the idea that, Jeff, I would come home and Jeff would just jump for joy, just overjoyed with my presence, which is fantastic because I know some people are not overjoyed with my presence. So it's good to have a dog. Let that be lesson number one here. Good to have a dog. But the other thing is when I think of Jeff, it's also been my experience that Jeff can see my inward being. He can see when I'm upset. Like the other day, I was pacing the floor. I was on a phone call, walking back and forth, back and forth. And I was clearly, like, I could sense it in my own spirit. I was amped up and ready to go. I was just trying to get things done. But I was on a mission. And Jeff was looking there. The dining room, living room are connected, and there's this half wall. uh, with a doorway, right? And he was looking like, just like watching me from as I was walking back and forth. And as I'd walk forward, he would kind of walk like this. So I've noticed that he can sense when I'm amped up. He can also sense when I'm in distress. I don't have to say anything, but if my countenance, my spirit, let's say, is low, in the dumps, depressed, working through something, he wants to come near me without me saying anything to console me, to make sure that I'm okay. I consider that elements of the spirit. Now, he doesn't know what I'm doing when I'm sitting at my computer, and so he'll come up and want to be with me.
Yep.
So he has an experience of something that I think we as humans often forget, because we see all of these things. There's another verse that says, don't walk by sight. Don't trust so much in what you see. And I think that's what this verse gets to, right? These things that are flesh and blood, our experience in our bodies, is not all there is. And we know it. And again, back to the idea of you don't have to have a Judeo-Christian background to understand that or respect it. In fact, delving into more controversial topics, we had a conversation with a gentleman not all that long ago who was talking about his experience on ayahuasca, which is a hallucinatory substance from South America, which is well known to give you a spiritual trip. Now, hallucinatory drugs have been used for thousands of years, and they are present in many, many plants. In fact, the refined substances that we see in banned substances or whatever are actually based on elements that exist in plants, right?
Yep.
So opioids, that's opium, which is from a plant. Aspirin is from a plant. It's refined, but it's from a plant. And in fact, some of these substances work better from a medicinal standpoint than some of the manufactured substances.
Yep.
My point though is this: I was watching this video. This guy's walking around a music festival, right? And some people are on all sorts of various drugs. And I'm not condoning drugs here. It's not my point. But this lady, people often talk about some sort of breakthrough, right? Now, this has been used to great effect with people who are struggling with PTSD, right? You can get on a trip and you can walk a person, you can talk to a person with an intention and from a medicinal or beneficial standpoint, not just a recreational, hey, we're going to go get high. From a medicinal standpoint, you set an intention and then you use a drug to basically wipe out the flesh and blood. It basically quiets all of the things that you see. And all of a sudden you start getting into this almost spirit realm where people talk about, I just realized, hey, we're all connected. I just realized, I had this breakthrough. And I was dealing with this thing and now suddenly I'm not dealing with it anymore. I was anxious all the time and my anxiety's gone. I was super introverted and I felt like so full of shame and I couldn't be around people, and boom, after this intentional, trip, like it's gone miraculously. Where did that happen? Right. And these are all based on plants, things that, let's say, God created.
Yep.
Now, this lady, as she's being interviewed, they're asking her, what's your best experience on being high or whatever, on mushrooms or something like that. And she said, for so long I was thinking about, I got to have this breakthrough. I got to have this breakthrough. And then she said, I was thinking about this. And she says, I think I already had. And that's why I keep looking for it. She said, I realized that the trip isn't the drug. The trip is life. This is the trip. And we are, and my expression in this trip is creativity. I want to create. I want to experience. I want to connect with people. I want to do great things. Right. And it was interesting that she came to that realization, which, many people go to therapy for years to figure this out. She came to this experience by sort of wiping away the flesh and blood and getting into the spirit realm and letting that have a spiritual or extraordinary experience, which would be, she would term it very spiritual in nature. And I wouldn't discount, for me, I wouldn't discount the idea that, maybe some of these things were created in plants by God to be used, not in their highly refined forms, which will kill you in some cases, but to be used as part of the human experience to help in some ways, open our minds, quiet some of the noise, and unlock or help us see some of these truths. Like, there is real evil in the world. There is real love in the world. We do have an obligation or responsibility. And some of this stuff that we take so seriously is passing away. And yet we need to deal with it, now in this present, this present darkness. And I think some people are experiencing that present darkness and then want to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what this verse is in part speaking to. So what do you think?
And not only that, but I mean, if you follow the trail of what he's talking about there, he's making a reference to all the way back to the book of Genesis. And they're known as the Watchers, right? These spiritual beings, subjects of the Most High God. Maybe you could call them demigods. Maybe you could call them lower gods, lesser gods. The part of the divine council who rebelled, and they show up in most ancient civilizations. Most ancient civilizations have some polytheistic, what would you call it, matrix through which to view the world. The Greeks had their gods, the Romans had their gods, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, all the ancient civilizations. The Canaanites had their gods. And they show up in surprisingly similar templates. And the Genesis narrative says that these beings were in the world and they intermarried with human women and gave birth to these gigantic creatures that do show up in scripture that actually get mentioned, called the Nephilim, right? But anyway, that's another rabbit hole. What I really wanted to point out from that was that I think part of the problem of the spiritual world, one reason the Bible cautions us to be so vigilant about it, is because, yes, it has, there are tremendous uses for natural substances, as well as, what's the word I'm looking for here? There was something I read somewhere, and I don't remember where I read this, about there was a certain amount, like maybe even 7 great art forms, one of which was weaponry, another which was music, another which was pharmacology, right? And these were taught by these beings to us. We didn't just happen upon them, we learned them, right? And that's why you read about, in Genesis, certain people excelled at them and became masters of archery and swordsmanship and metallurgy and stuff like that. That's where they learned them. But they learned them, but the problem is corruption is always there from the beginning. And so we have to be very careful with what we're doing. Not because it's, the good example is the occult stuff, right? We're not told to be careful of that because it's just dark, voodoo, evil, wicked. We're told to be careful with it because it works. Because it actually does work, right? It does not surprise me to learn that people are experiencing breakthroughs and stuff like that using these substances because they work. But at the same time, this being a faith-based community, if they quote unquote work in helping you to feel more secure in the idea that you are the center of the universe, you are the source of your own life, you are your own moral matrix, and you are not subject to any higher authorities, then you're being led in a direction you don't want to go down. But does it work? I guess so. I mean, I've had people tell me that too. They've tried these things and it's like, wow, man, I had this amazing vision and all this incredible stuff. And I'm like, I could see how it would work. I'm not going to do it myself. I'm not going to tell anyone to do it, but hearing that, I can see how it would work.
Yeah. So, bringing this to the present moment, a community for faith-based founders. We have useful things in our physical realm, which act on our physical bodies, which simply, in my opinion, demonstrate that we are spirit. And there is something supernatural. And, I don't want to go down too far down this rabbit hole of drugs, but there's some commonalities. So when people have, quote unquote, bad trips, there are some common themes in what people see. People have not spoken to one another. They'll see certain entities, let's see, right? Which to me, I don't have any judgment on whether it's a physical, whether it's your brain making things up, and we all have, similar physical properties, and maybe that's how neurons fire or something like that. And we, or maybe we do see or have the capacity in some cases to see things that are, to see the unseen. I would not, in my belief system would fully put that in the camp of entirely possible, that under certain circumstances we see the unseen. And this verse that we're talking about encourages us to respect the unseen and to do something about it. That's, I think, the essence of what we're talking about today. As faith-based founders, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. All right. Now, let's say we run a business. We'll bring it to the very practical level here. Emissary Publishing helps tell the stories that matter. And specifically with faith-based individuals because of a variety of factors. Now, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Oh yeah, but there's profit, there's loss, there's, work that needs to be done. These are the flesh and blood matters. And yet the heartbeat, the intention behind Emissary is to use that flesh and blood, not to wrestle with it, but to use it as a tool to communicate from one spiritual being to another spiritual being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the essence of message. I don't think the flesh and blood cares one bit about message. My fingers do not care. My mind doesn't even necessarily care. My spirit cares, and it takes in information through this body.
Yeah, with everything I've been learning lately, I think flesh and blood receives one kind of message and spirit receives another. Right? You could say, well, the nerves in your hand would disagree. They'd say, we do all sorts of messaging. Thank you very much. Right. But the messages that we're talking about absolutely are spiritual. And that's part of what makes what we do a success, I think, is because you have to do this, you have to have a certain fire in your belly. We come up with that expression, right? What is it? Does it literally mean your stomach is on fire? No, of course. We're talking about a spiritual concept there. We're saying there's an overwhelming desire and a determination. An overwhelming desire. Well, how do you measure an overwhelming desire? How do you quantify it? You don't. You can compare it relatively. You can say, well, this person has much more of an overwhelming desire than that person. Yes, totally. I totally get that. But you can't say this person has 200 milliliters of overwhelming desire and this person only has 2. It doesn't work that way. This person's fire in their belly is 5 feet wide and this person's is only 2 inches wide. Yeah, no, I don't buy that. And that's going back to the original point there. The degree to which you feel convicted, urged, like it's essential, like the world is waiting on you. Those are all spiritual things that you have to, I want to sort of bridge between the original definition I gave, the counterpoint examples that you showed there about Jeff, and say you can have, I think all living creatures have some degree of spirit, but there's only one that has the unbounded degree that we do. And so you can have a message burning you up on the inside that you feel you've got to get out there. And then you can test it and send it out there, send out a signal and see what comes back. And you can figure out pretty quickly, oh yeah, I'm not the only one. People need to hear this. And that's just things that, the animal kingdom, for whatever measure of spirit they do have, and they, they can send out alarms to one another. They can send out communications to one another. I listen to the birds chirping out my window every day. Not, to us, it sounds like music. To them, it's like, stay out of this is my turf. Stay away. Go find your own branch to chirp on, right? They're actually,
and now they've studied plants, and plants communicate.
Yeah.
Plants feel pain and they send out signals to everybody else, and they're constantly communicating in some sort of electrical manner.
Yep.
With all the plants around,
But the message
never identified before.
But the message of singularly human things, and these can be negative things and they can be positive things. They can be things that push us back down into our animal nature, or they can be things that elevate us to our angelic nature. Those, you have to have the right built-in receptor, the right receiving communication equipment that only we have to process it at the level we do. Can animals process music? Yes, they can, but they can't process it the way we can. They know that music is being played. They don't know why it's being played, right? And to bring it back home, Jeff knows that you're home. Jeff knows that he can see that you're upset, but he doesn't really understand why you're upset. It's not that he could come alongside you and say, tell me what happened, right? He's not going to do that. He's going to express sympathy because that's what they do in the pack, right? But he's not going to attempt to help you unpack your feelings and get to the origin of why you're feeling the pain you are. So,
well, to that point, I do remember not all that long ago, just walking around in my kitchen. I think I was prepping some sort of breakfast or whatever, talking to Jeff, looking down at him, and I began to recount to him, how I slept, or, having a conversation with him. And I started on basically speaking to him as though he were human, or like a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the feeling of being able to speak to a dog or speak to anybody who was listening.
Yes.
And the I don't know what the word for it is in this moment, but just a good feeling that I had. being
Mhm.
able to be heard. And
Yes.
so I think that, part of the role of animals and their spirit nature is that they can hear us, and they know what they see, things or hear things that we're not saying. And that makes us feel heard in special ways.
Yes.
The American Indians used to, have great respect for this, and other cultures do too, spirit animals
Mhm.
and the embodiment of who you are. Now, back to this idea of spirit, I was thinking of David Goggins and his 40% rule. In his 40% rules, talks about that people give up at 40% of their true potential, and you have to engage your brain into it and into helping your body understand it's going to suffer.
Yes.
Because your body has given up. It doesn't want to feel this your brain has given up, and your body can take more, because your body is simply acting out of what your spirit said. So your
Yes.
spirit said, "Hey, I'm drowning." Great. Your body's going to think it's drowning. It's going to start acting it out. And you're from the military. I'm not. Navy SEAL training. He talks about this idea of when you're training, you don't stop when you're tired. You stop when
Yep.
you're done. When you think you're done, you're only 40% into what your body's capable of doing. That's just the limits that we put on ourselves. And then this idea, if you're willing to suffer, and I mean suffer, your brain and body, once connected together, can do anything. Now, let's tie that together with this Ephesians 6:12 verse. For we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We don't wrestle against that. We suffer, right? But we have to look past that.
Mhm.
Our body wants to wrestle against flesh and blood. It wants to do battle with flesh and blood, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're giving up. But we have to train our brains to not respond to our bodies, but have our bodies respond to our brains. So
Mhm.
in our brain, in our spirit, if we connect our mind and our spirit together and we say, wait a second, this is for a greater purpose. This is something that is necessary. This is something I really believe in. This is something that's really valuable. And I'm going to push forward and I'm going to get it done. I'm going to not wrestle against the flesh and blood. No, I'm wrestling for something that is spiritual in nature. I'm wrestling against the evil in the world. I'm wrestling for something greater. And we sort of dumb it down in this concept down maybe I shouldn't say it that way. Maybe not dumbing it down, but Simon Sinek, start with why. It's kind of the same thing.
Mhm.
It's just on a superficial, I look at it, well, that's kind of a superficial level. Start with why. Well, I figured out why I'm going to do it. Yeah, but you're going to give up at some point in time.
Mhm.
However, if you saw what you were doing on an eternal time level, on an eternal time scale with
Yeah.
eternal value, well, of course, like Emissary, we're going to go help spread the messages that we believe matter, because this is an eternal battle.
Yeah.
This is for spirit. This is for soul. This is, and that will work its way out into the physical world.
Yeah. Financial advisors have a good rhetorical question for this. I like it. I've heard a couple of different ones say it, and they ask, what kind of ancestors are we behaving like? Right? And it's a question designed to get you to think about the future. Never mind the eternal future. We're talking here about the temporal one, right? They're saying, what decisions are we making today that have potential way on into a future past which will be long gone? And if you think about it, well, our ancestors did that to us too. They may not have made good decisions, or they might have made good ones, but either way, they're affecting us. Every decisions, all the decisions, particularly in our own family lineage, the communities where we grew up, the nations where we live, et cetera, all of those are the product of, pile upon pile upon pile of human decisions, every little last one having an effect. So if you're a founder, if you're faith-based entrepreneur, you're building a business, that's a good question to have in your back pocket, in the back of your head all the time, is what kind of founder, what kind of legacy am I building by the decisions I'm making today? And a great example of this, right? I've been chipping away at the block of Emissary for the better part of 7 years altogether. Certainly the last 4 years. Started out just ghostwriting content for people. Then some people approached me about wanting to write books. And so I started getting into ghostwriting books. And then you and I worked together, and that got me into author coaching. And then I suddenly realized, you know what? Why not go the full length? Since we have, between the two of us, we have the ability to do that. So now we're a publishing company. And then, every now and then we get to have interesting conversations like the one I had a couple of weeks ago with a guy who wanted to write a book, but he was also a musician. And he was also a songwriter. And that made me think, we could publish music one day. We could publish video content one day. We could make movies one day. I'm not saying I'm going to do any of this. I'm just saying that it's there. I'm saying that by persisting and not walking away, all the times I felt tempted to walk away, all the times I nearly went out of business, all the times I've come down to bone dry in the bank account. There's no money in there. People have left. Clients have canceled projects and all that. But I've said time and again, wait a minute, that I wasn't looking for this business. God brought it to my doorstep and said, do this and see where it leads you. So spiritually, I've looked at it and I said, this is not God playing a bad joke on me. This is him giving me one experience after another that over time builds towards a legacy that frankly I could not have even thought to look for. And if that's the case, then what business do I have walking away just because things aren't swimming along and I'm not getting what the gurus all say I should get by now? I should be 10xing and getting, I should be sipping mimosas and working on my laptop on the hood of my Lamborghini out on the beaches of Maui.
I've been meaning to ask you where that Lamborghini is or where the video is of you on a private jet.
Coming soon enough. Right along with my African bank account money. I got a call the other day from Mr. Ungalele who said, it's going to be there in just a couple of weeks. Just send me your social security number. You'll be fine.
Yeah, he'll take it from there. And will he take it? Yeah. So
the internet.
I think it really does. I think this verse today for me and why I sort of love this topic at this point is it is so easy to get caught in the wrestling with the flesh and blood, which is a bit of a distraction. It's not that it's not necessary. It is necessary. But when we've identified that the priority is not flesh and blood, the priority is something greater, that allows us, I think, to use flesh and blood in a way that really matters, that brings us towards an end. I think this can be said in maybe simpler terms. Maybe this isn't simple. I admit my brain thinks some things are simple, which nobody else understands. But like Abraham Lincoln, right? The old saying, if you gave me 4 hours to cut down a tree or whatever, I'll take 3 hours to sharpen the axe. All right.
Yeah.
Now that's an interesting saying, but the point and why I'm connecting it here is that when we don't understand what we are actually working with, it's like working with a dull axe. All of the power that we could give it it is not concentrated at a point.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we're dealing with all these flesh and blood matters. Yeah. But a lot of that is distraction.
Yeah.
Instead, I want to figure out what really matters, which moves all of my energy down to a single point. And when I take all of my energy into that point, now I affect real change.
Yeah.
And I get real results. And the flesh and blood will do what flesh and blood does. It will, like right now, my left knee is a little wonky.
Mm-hmm.
Because I, tore some ligaments or whatever playing sand volleyball with the church group. And I've been ridiculed that maybe church groups aren't supposed to be so, somebody has said this to me over and over again. maybe church groups aren't supposed to be so competitive. And I was like, that's nonsense. Like, I'm here to play. I'm here to play. I'm here to win. Right.
We're all just supposed to get along.
Right. So I put all of that energy into that activity, and the flesh and blood didn't keep up. Now, I could whine and moan about the flesh and blood. I could wrestle against the flesh and blood. I could think about that constantly. Or I could go, well, you know what? This body's just doing what this body does. And I'm going to put all of the effort in because that's what my spirit wants to do. And I'm not going to get hung up on wrestling against the flesh and blood. I'm going to deal with the things that I think matter more. And the flesh and blood is just going to have to keep up. And if it doesn't, if it falls away, it's going to. I already know that.
Yeah.
I'm, 46. Body's not going to keep up forever. And, there are things I could do about it. There are ways I could treat it better. And I might want to treat that better, not because that's the point, but because that enables me to do the things that really matter, to really get that energy down to a fine point and get all of my being behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which works its way out into business, right?
That's what hearkening back to the military. I never trained at the level David Goggins did, but I trained at a level that most civilians would find pretty intense and uncomfortable. Made all the more intense by the fact that you do it with drill sergeants screaming in your face and, trying their best to humiliate you and get a rise out of you and stuff like that.
Which is kind of like wrestling against flesh and blood, right? Don't respond to the screaming. Don't respond to that's there to distract you.
Yes.
And take you off of what you're actually there for, what you're really battling against.
I can recall a certain day early in basic training, probably couldn't have been more than about a week or two in. They had us out in out in front of the barracks. There were there's this large open area, and they had several small pits. The pits were like full of rubber tire shavings, so you could kind of fall down on them and not hurt yourself. But they were also really good for a whole bunch of training activities. And they sent us all out there. They yelled at us, "Get out there and get in the pit." And we get out in the pit, and they're making us do flutter kicks. And so flutter kicks, you're lying on your back, and your legs are up in the air like a pair of scissors going up and down like this. And it's pouring down rain, so it's raining in my face, and I'm doing flutter kicks. And the next thing I know is my drill sergeant and the company first sergeant both converge on me like this. So their faces are up in my face, right? And the first sergeant, "You're not going to last 2 seconds in Iraq." And I'm sitting there just doing the flutter kicks. But as that progressed, right, you figure out, I can do this even if I've got people screaming in my face. I can do it even if I can run, I can jump, I can shoot, I can climb, I can take shelter, I can pick up a guy and carry him on my shoulders. Even if there are bombs going off, even if there are bullets flying by, even if everything's chaos, you retain that. You can proceed with that. And so when I actually did last more than 2 seconds in Iraq, and we came up on this scene of a firefight, and it's at nighttime, it's completely dark. There's little lights traveling through the sky because they're called tracer rounds, right? That the rifle, the AK-47s and the M16s fired. And so we see tracer rounds going this way and that way, and we see explosions, and I'm driving this truck, right? And I got my buddy in the seat next to me, and he's up there's a parapet up there, so he's up there with his gun. And I've got my rifle, so I'd grab my rifle and I'd rested it on the window, the open window of my truck. I've got the window open, right? They're shooting rounds straight at these vehicles. I put the rifle down there. I grabbed the wheel with my left hand, and I just fire. And then I ran out. Okay, drop the magazine, load the next one in. And then I kept driving like that. And I drove right through it. And I came out the other end, and I'm like, that was fun. Glad I didn't die.
Well, it does underscore the idea of training. And I think that to be a good founder, to be, maybe not to be a good founder, maybe to excel as a founder, we need to train for the things that we are likely to encounter. Just like you trained for the military.
Mm-hmm.
If as a founder, we trained that, it's going to take some late nights. It's going to take some early mornings. It's going to take some weekends. I look back on maybe the mid, I don't know, 2008, something like that, somewhere around there, that time frame, maybe a little bit earlier. I remember building my e-commerce company, and there were some times when we really had to dig in. We lost a supplier one week before, in fact, a Friday before, I think, Memorial Day or something like that. And so we took all of Memorial Day. I quickly concepted a plan to mitigate the trouble that was coming upon us because we lost this supplier. And we asked people, hey, if you're willing to just give us some hours, we could use your help adding some products to the site and yada, yada. And I took all of Memorial Day weekend. I slept at the office, I think, at that time, and just programmed the entire weekend, and got ahead of this soon coming trouble because we were going to run out of stock.
Yeah.
Now, that training at that moment was super beneficial because I've learned that there are certain times as a founder that's what it takes. You're going to have to say, no, I'm not, this holiday will come again.
Yep.
But this weekend, I'm going to take all weekend and we're just going to get ahead of this stuff. Because that's what this company needs. That's what the organization needs, because the higher goal is going to be sacrificed.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't dig in, back to the David Goggins thing. If I don't train my body to suffer a bit, then I can't achieve the things that are in my mind. The body is my servant, not the other way around.
Yeah. And another thing I would tell people is also be prepared for failures in logistics, failures in supply chains, failures in all of that, if I'm going to use my military lingo, but also be prepared for friend and foe alike to mischaracterize, misinterpret, or slander what you're doing and how you're doing it. Be prepared for them to make a big brouhaha out of stuff that is really no big deal. Oh my gosh, my hair's up. And no, it's not. You're fine. But they don't hear that. And be prepared, right? I'm thinking now of Rudyard Kipling's poem, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, lied about, if you can keep your head when when everyone around you is losing theirs and blaming it on you, be prepared for that. I had that in the military. I've had it as an entrepreneur too. I've had people just freak out and go all cattywampus on me because it's something I said or didn't say that I never meant, or didn't deliberately not say, just didn't think to bring it up. And people people lose their minds. And I'm like, what's the matter with you?
Yeah.
Be prepared for that, and don't take it. This is what I've learned to do, and this is way easier to say than to do when it's actually happening to you. But don't take it personally. Just understand what is familiar and simple, and there's an explanation to you, is not that way for your customer. It's not that way for your supplier. It's not that way for your employer. Sometimes it's not even that way for your business partner.
Most of the time, they're operating with information without information that you have,
or wisdom, right? They don't understand, and even worse, if it looks like, but it isn't. You're actually doing the right thing, but to them it looks like suicide or you're hitting the self-destruct button, or you're sacrificing something that is really important, but what's really what is really at stake. And I love that scene from Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis, where he's thundering at his cabinet members about the 13th Amendment, and he says, "I know I need this," and nobody else in the room could see it. But he was right. He needed that in order to resolve. There's some things a leader can compromise, can even allow themselves to be led by subordinates. And there are other situations where a leader just has to have such a clear concept and vision of what's truly important and what's eternal, that they say, as long as the decision is mine, this is the direction we're going, and you can either follow me or you can get out of the way.
The CEO of NVIDIA just gave a talk to Stanford that it went, I don't know, I guess the term be viral. And he's a very respected individual. NVIDIA, for the viewers and listeners here who don't know what NVIDIA does, they used to make video cards, and called GPUs, graphic processing units, as opposed to CPUs. So computers would run with CPUs, computational processing units, right? GPUs are built differently. They are massively parallel processors, so that you can write out an entire screen. You can process a lot of things all at once, right? It's like having a multi-lane highway versus a single street. CPUs are really good at single streets, and then they would make multi-core CPUs, so you'd have like 4 lanes. Well, GPUs are just like, we got a ton of memory, it's all accessible, and like we just build out rows. Wow. Well, GPUs now are super helpful with AI, because AI needs to process a lot of disparate things and then pull it all together to pump it out to one, like, let's say, like one monitor, right? So it's processing a lot of different domains, a lot of different languages, a lot of different topics, and then pulls it all together, builds it into something that's sensible, and pushes it out to the user. So NVIDIA is back on the scene, and they kind of saw this coming. Now, Genshin Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, gave this talk at Stanford, and he, instead of congratulating everybody, for being at Stanford and glad handing and patting each other on the back, he said he wished the graduating students ample doses of pain and suffering, because he believes that suffering shapes character, and that character, not just intelligence, is what makes a great founder.
Yeah. So
he says that challenges are a way to build resilience, which is a key trait for founders who will inevitably face setbacks, and people with high expectations may struggle with setbacks. So he thinks that one of the greatest character traits that the person can have is resilience to overcome struggle and suffering. And he thinks that you need to build that, you need to train that through pain and suffering. And some people, as you can imagine, rebuffed that. We're like, we shouldn't have to have pain and suffering. And some people, the wise people, perhaps, in my opinion, look at that and go, well, that makes complete sense, because that is the life of a founder. It's pain and suffering. It's seeing this. It's not getting lost in the wrestling against flesh and blood, as though my body needs to feel good, right? Yeah. Like, oh, my knee hurts. Let's whine about my knee until somebody can help me fix my knee, right? Well, you're not going to go very far. Yeah. You'll give up because your knee hurts, and then you'll use that as an excuse, and you'll wait for somebody to fix that for you. Whereas when we have that pain and suffering, we realize that so many of these things they just happen, and they don't matter. It's the screaming drill sergeant when you're there to not respond to that. You have to train that to go, wait a second, that doesn't have to rise in my spirit. My spirit doesn't have to respond to that. I have a job to do, and I'm going to go get that job done. And my body's going to tell me no. People are going to come against me and say, why are you working on the weekend? Why are you spending such late nights? Is it really worth it? Like your bank account once told you, it's time. You got to give up, right? And you're like, no, I think my spirit says I need to move through this. I need to move on. There is something more here. And it took a while for that to develop, all of the lessons that bring you to today. So in our final minutes, I'm going to put this back up on the screen here. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. If we are indeed spirit, or feel we are led by some sort of spiritual nature, does that inform our why? Does that inform our motivation? Does that help us see further and past some of these present struggles and not get lost in wrestling against the present struggles, the struggles of flesh and blood, but keeps us moving on? And as we move through to the things that matter, we ask our flesh and blood to just catch up or move out of the way. And how does that change who we are as founders when we're building companies that we believe are going to change the world?
I was thinking of the movie, I got another movie reference, Company Men. And it stars Tommy Lee Jones and Ben Affleck and some other Kevin Costner's in it. Ben Affleck plays this arrogant, young, slick sales executive at one of these companies that got wiped out by the 2008 crash. And, they lose, he's got a family and they lose their home and they got to move in with their parents. And then he gets, to get by, he actually accepts work from his brother-in-law, who's played by Kevin Costner, who has a construction business. So he's out there like swinging hammers and, putting drywall and building houses. And he hates the work, obviously. It's not his kind of thing. But there's this interesting scene right at the end where he finds out that the guy played by Tommy Lee Jones, who was one of the executives at the firm that collapsed, is starting a new company. He's got a sales position. It'll pay him, more than half of what he used to earn at the old company. And he goes to his brother-in-law and he says, they offered me a job and this is what it pays. And his brother-in-law says, can I be honest with you? You should take that job because you're a lousy carpenter. Right. But then he says something like, I noticed you overpaid me the last time. And he says, yeah, well, it must have been some kind of mistake. And he says, you're not worried about it? And he says, it's business. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. It all works out in the end. And I've always remembered that scene, especially that line that he says, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. It all works out in the end. Because I've been up and I've been down. I'm still here. I've been through probably 3 or 4 times now where I thought, this is the end. This is it. I'm out of cash. I'm not going into debt. I haven't got any new customers. I don't know where to turn. And then all of a sudden, oh, no. What are you talking about? Everything's fine. Yeah, but we're back on. We're going, now we're going to get there. So you get this, you get this perspective if you stick with it. If you don't walk away, it's hard earned, but it's the best kind you can have because you earned it. You went through it. You didn't walk away. You didn't give up. You didn't quit. It's the same thing as for me as being a soldier. There were plenty of times I could have tried to go AWOL, or I could have tried to come up with some excuse. I could have tried to get out of being deployed. I could have tried this. I could have tried that. I said, no, I'm sticking with this and I'm going where it leads me and I'm finishing on the other end because I got to learn how to stick with stuff. And so with entrepreneurship, yes, I've been discouraged at points and I've had people, my bride and other people come along and say, you can't give up. You got to keep going. And I see it leading me in the right place. So I think all along the spiritual forces have certainly attempted to talk me out of it. The flesh and blood have more than attempted to talk me out of it, but I never listened to them. And you get to a point where the world begins to sort of bend for you in ways that it's never bent before. And things seem to happen that you previously like, I could never do that before. No, but you can now. And I love it. It's the best journey I've ever been on.
Absolutely. And I think it's the difference, the contrast between the conversation I had with a guy just the other day, went up to him and, and I know I'm just tangentially through somebody and said, "Hey, how's work going?" "Oh, it's going." I said, "Oh, do you love what you do?" Pays the bills." "Well, you've been there for like almost 20 years. "Yeah." I said, "Well, you must be good at it." "I don't know." And I thought, as a guy in his mid 40s, do you want to be that guy? Makes 120 grand a year. Makes it just so he can, and he takes great pride in the fact that maybe someday he'll get to, stop working.
Mm-hmm.
I would, having been through, it seems, multiple variations of businesses, some wildly successful, some not so much. And I know for myself, I would much rather wake up every day or many days and know in my spirit, man, I love what I do. The flesh and blood will catch up, or it'll get out of the way. One or the other, because it's subject to me. I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna be that guy who's like, nah, well, pays the bills. Yeah, maybe I'm good at it. Hopefully I won't have to do this forever. Like, that sounds like a dreadful use of life. And if the woman on her evaluating her trips, drug-induced trips, has come to the conclusion that life is the trip, life is the thing, your life is the thing you've been looking for, then it harkens back to an old adage, I think by some monk or somebody, who said something like enjoy your life, or enjoy this moment, because this moment is your life.
Mm.
And I think that gets back to the central theme of today, which is the flesh and blood, the things that we battle so much for and against. That's not the battle. The battle is the unseen.
Yeah.
It's the thing for your spirit, thing that will take away the years that you have on this planet, or will give meaning to the years that you have on this planet. So make your decision.
And don't think of the
go ahead.
And don't think of the unseen as only like in this moment, if all of a sudden God pulled back the veil and you could see demons and angels battling, or, streaks of different colors and flashes and bangs and visions. And that's all possible. I'm not negating or diminishing any of that. What I always try to get people to see when you think about the unseen, think about all the things you currently know that you didn't used to know 10 years ago. That was unseen to you then. Now you see it clear as a bell.
Right.
So unseen,
things in your spirit.
Yeah. Unseen is not necessarily cosmic. It's actually just simply unknown as well. It's not known. And then you have to say to yourself, okay, well, now today I'm 43 years old. One day, all else being equal, I'll be 63 years old. What will I see at 63 that I didn't see at 43?
Yeah. All right. Well, woo! I feel like we've been on a trip here.
Yeah.
It's been good.
Listen, we were not on magic mushrooms, for anybody wanting to know during this episode.
It's true. But this has been a good journey so far, and I'm looking forward to the another moment in this journey, which I'll call today. And you have been joined today by Paul Edward, my good friend and colleague here with Emissary Publishing. I'm Jason Todd, and this is the Thinker community at the Thinker Business Accelerator. Faith-based founders who want to change the world, this is your place. And if you have something that you want a message that you want to tell the world, consider speaking with Paul at Emissary Publishing, or you can talk to me, publishwithemissary.com. I'm going to say this episode is sponsored by Emissary Publishing. We've got some good things going on. I'm excited to be on the journey with you, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, my friend.